All right, next question then is, what is the process of going through MKUltra?
Well, MKUltra was a series of dozens and dozens of different projects. So that's kind of a loose term that's used for all of these. But in reality, MKUltra was done at dozens of universities. It was done at military bases. It was done at psychiatric institutions, hospitals. It was like a broad, vast research operation that involved everything from LSD to sleep studies. In fact, most people don't know that a lot of MKUltra research was being done in Australia, and a lot of the famous doctors out of the Australian system that were studying schizophrenia. There's a serial killer, one of the most famous serial killers in Australia. His name is Harry something, but he was in charge of a giant sleep studies clinic. And what he was doing was putting people to the point of death and then bringing them back immediately as part of his, but that turned out to be part of MKUltra. So, I mean, MKUltra is very broad, very vast. And so even the Theodore Kaczynski, when he was at Harvard, he actually signed up to be part of MKUltra explicitly. I think probably because he thought he would just get free drugs. So that's the sense I get. I don't think he knew what he was getting into, but it was like, oh man, they're giving out free drugs, dude. Yeah, let's do it. But he ended up part of MKUltra. In fact, Whitey Bulger was part of MKUltra. He was being given LSD, I think, in prison, if I recall. So it's very broad, very vast.
Annabelle's asking your thoughts on the 1927 movie Metropolis.
Yeah, I included that in my second book. I think it's the last chapter in my second book because there's a lot of weird socialist, esoteric stuff going on in there. I think Fritz Lang, if I recall, was explicitly a socialist. And so the point of that book, of that movie, is to demonstrate that we can have a future technocracy, but we're going to have to be careful because you can't let the classes have class war. So they have to, in some way, function in a synergy. That's the point of the movie at the end. But what's most interesting about the movie is that it came out in the 1920s, and you have this idea of the creation of AI and SEX bots in a 1920s film. And we're right now, like 100 years later, at the point where they're beginning to roll this out. So I think it's a very prophetic film. And that's what I highlighted in my chapter on it.
Yeah, I've just started to watch this movie, something about this robot.
Oh, the Megan Fox one?
Yeah.
We just watched that. So yeah, you'll see what it's kind of it's like an updated version of Metropolis. Exactly.
And there was Deus Ex Machina. Am I pronouncing it correct? That one as well.
Oh, Ex Machina. That was actually a really good movie. Yeah, we covered that too.
Yeah. All right. So Sarai Gonzalez, does the current status of Hollywood and how it operates reflect the founders of Hollywood? Did they design it to be this way, exploitative and controlling?
To a degree, yes. I mean, I don't know that they knew what it would become, but the earliest days of Hollywood, and then the vaudeville, and then the studio systems, like when the studio system comes about, if I recall, this is from mainline academia. This is not my theory, but if I recall, I mean, it's pretty much all but one, like 4 or 5 of the major studios. The heads of them were all members of they were all Freemasons, very active Freemasons. So I think that from the earliest days, they wanted to lock down that system and control it. And even the one studio that wasn't, which I think was RKO, well, that was like Rockefeller. so that you have like studio systems owned by a certain people group, shall we say, from the Middle East, and then you have one studio that's like owned by the moguls of America. So it's yes, I would say it's always been intentionally. It doesn't mean everybody's bad. It doesn't mean all the movies are bad. It just means that overall the system was there as a massive propaganda engine for sure.
Question from Todor about the Tavistock Institute, alleged to have a task to suffocate cultural optimism of post-war 50s and 60s. What are your thoughts on the Tavistock Institute?
Yeah, I've gone pretty deep into Tavistock. In fact, I just recently got one of their official histories from a guy, H.V. Dix, who was a member of the Tavistock Institute. And the official history written in the 1960s or 70s actually basically admits a lot of this. So we've had people in the conspiracy sphere writing for a long time about the role of Tavistock, Dr. John Coleman, Daniel Estulin. So a lot of people have talked about it for a long time. And in fact, it was pretty clear that they were very open in the last 10 years that Tavistock was at the tip of the spear pushing the TRANS agenda for the last 10 years. They've admitted this, and they supposedly were shutting down the clinic because there was so much backlash against it. I would not be surprised if they weren't involved in every aspect of social engineering, including, how did you word it, shutting down optimism or something like that. Yeah, they've been the premier brainwashing institute for the last 100 years, I think. I mean, and you have people like all the people from the Frankfurt School. You've got Carl Jung. You've got everybody who's anybody working with Tavistock over the years.
All right, guys, we've got 20 minutes left with Jay. Get your questions in before Big Homie comes in. And Jay's links are all in the...
Am I not Big Homie?
He's 6'8", I think.
Okay, he's bigger than me. He wins.
Yeah,
he's the bigger homie.
Okay. Pam, is there anybody in Hollywood who hasn't sold their soul to the devil? And why do they thank God at the award ceremonies when they worship the devil? It's an inversion, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, they could mean their God, right? They could mean the devil. They could mean anything. Also, they could do it just for public purview, right? Because most people in America are not open Satanists, so they might just be doing it to look good and like, okay, so the Americans believe in God or whatever. So I'll say thank you, God. So maybe just for looks and PR, but yeah, I would imagine there's plenty of people who aren't totally sold out or who, are naive or who, have good intentions. I mean, again, the old legacy system's going away. So I think that'll be less and less relevant. I've done a lot of interviews with Jamie Kennedy, the comedian, and the guy from, Malibu's Most Wanted, Scream. We've done a lot of live shows and stand-up and podcasts together. And he's very candid in his podcast and the interviews we've done. He's like, Hollywood's dead. He's like, I'm still here. I still work in it, but this old legacy system's dying and going away. I don't think Jamie sold his soul. He's very open. He's anti-New World Order. He's a very honest, cool guy. So he's one example. I think there's plenty of other people too. I'm sure I've met some comedians and stand-ups that are pretty well known, and I don't think they're sellouts or bad guys. I think typically the most sold out would be like we're talking about earlier, like when you get to that certain like $100 million, $1 billion level, that's where you're kind of required and expected to sell out, I think.
Mary wants your most recent favorite book title.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now on the history of British espionage in terms of the turn of the last century. It's called Black Gold Spies, and it's about how the British Empire was really mainly concerned with locking down control of oil. They didn't actually end up getting that. It ended up being America and the Rockefellers that really won that. But it's an insight into how the British power structure worked, the Royal Society, how it worked at the turn of the last century. So it's highlighting people like T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. If you've never seen that movie, it's kind of about that. So that's a really good book. I recommend that to anybody who's interested. And the reason it matters, you're like, well, that's 120 years ago. Who cares? Well, the way the system operates, it's the same. So if you go back to the great game of what Russia and the West were doing 100 plus years ago, it's the same stuff that's happening right now. So like history just repeats. That's why it matters.
Same stuff, but with high tech.
Yeah, exactly.
So a lot of people are asking about a lot of different names and a lot of different questions about people getting dragged into the Jay-Z Diddy thing. And I'll give you some of the names: Naomi Campbell, Mary J. Blige, LeBron, J-Lo, Beyonce. Do you think there could be some kind of domino effect with these other people?
I don't. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I would think that the way all of those groups work is like a kind of network and secret society structure, even if they're not all literally in the same secret society. We know that, for example, Boule Society is a great example of like a high level, prominent Black secret society or fraternity, so to speak. I actually believe a lot of fraternities are just kind of watered down secret societies. or maybe even actual full-on secret societies, kind of like Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones is a great example of, Yale, Harvard people, whatever. I know it's from Yale, but people out of that power structure, the WASP power structure, that's how they're recruited into the OSS and the CEO structure. And I think you have these same type of things for other people groups like black secret societies, black networks that recruit. So they're going to operate the same way as Skull and Bones and those things work. It's just for other people groups. So that being the case, I would not be surprised if J-Lo and all these wasn't Naomi Campbell close to Epstein?
She's everywhere. She's with Diddy, Weinstein, all of them.
Yeah. Okay. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know any specifics. But yeah.
So Susan is saying, if Hollywood is dead, what will replace it?
Right now, it's just shifting to the internet and the studio systems of Amazon, Apple. I forget the other one. I guess Netflix has their own studios. So I mean, it's just internet now. But I mean, it's the same ethos. It's not fundamentally different in terms of its morals and the propaganda. In fact, it's probably worse now because it seems like the kind of messaging that we get from Netflix, the last few years has been even worse than what Hollywood's able to put out. So it'll go to that. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe those things are the people. And I think Netflix stock has been going down over the last several years with their scandals. Disney has been tanking through their scandals with all the degeneracy that they push. So hopefully people will continue to not support these mega entities that are mind controlling everybody.
What are your thoughts on the movie Wizard of Oz and Wicked and the people who wrote the stories?
I've looked into Frank Baum. I think he's an interesting character because he was a theosophist. So he was involved in the occult, kind of a, weird secret society kind of dude. And he did pack a lot of theosophical meanings into the Oz series. If you look at something like Return to Oz, we did a whole podcast breakdown on that film, which is a really weird Disney film from the 1980s. And, there's a lot of mind control, MKUltra stuff going on in that film. But I would say that overall, I think the ethos is very similar to the patterns of the stories that you see in Through the Looking Glass. I've done big breakdowns of that book by Lewis Carroll. And there's a lot of mind control, alternate MPD, DID stuff going on explicitly in Lewis Carroll's books. I think it's the same stuff going on with Oz. So they become really good structures and patterns for people who are into mind control. In fact, I think Dr. Ewan Cameron in John Marks's book on MKUltra, it was either Wizard of Oz or Lewis Carroll's Looking Glass that he used as his pattern, supposedly, for trying to restructure a person's personality. So they literally did at one point use these stories as models of how to try to create different personalities in people. Whether they were super successful with that, I don't know. A lot of the MKUltra research was destroyed, so we don't know how successful it was. But I think there is I don't know that Frank Baum intended it to be an MKUltra thing. He didn't know about that. But people were realizing a long time ago, even ancient Egypt, they seemed to realize that you could hypnotize people. People had perhaps multiple personalities in the ancient world, possession type stuff. So I think that as we get closer to the modern era, people were just kind of putting these ideas into their stories, and then they become templates for later intellectuals or mind control mad scientists to try to say, oh, let's try to use this as a manual.